This is What is Subaru Natsuki from ReZero was a Power Ranger Part 2 Mystic Force. Let's dive right into it. So we last left off after a climactic battle between Elsa, Reinhardt, and also Subaru. And Subaru showing his true colors as a Mystic Force Green Ranger. Now, if you want to know more about the lore and what Power Rangers mean in this world, we will learn a little bit more about that in this part, but I did give a slight rundown of what it means in part 1. So go watch part 1. But let's dive and continue into our story. We open our story off with Subaru opening his eyes, noticing a new, ceiling. Not recognizing the ceiling and waking up to no one around him. Sorry for the noise in the background with my mic set around. But he would start to get up, pushing the, blankets off of him and walking around the corridors and the hallways of a newfound mansion. Him walking and walking, and eventually finding the hallways looping themselves over, as he would have recognized maybe this is pretty much an RPG type of, you gotta guess the right door. So, him being Super Natsuki, being lucky as hell, well, semi-lucky, we'll get into that later, but him opening the door first go and finding a petite little blonde-haired girl, later known as Beatrice. Beatrice straight up is confused, but also is kind of, she kind of pissed off that he came up in here unannounced, but he says that, it's a new place, and honestly, I'm a champ at these type of things. They have to talk a little bit as our conversation kind of gets a little dull when, she asks him, can you get out now? She gets closer to him as he's confused, but she shocks him with energy, pretty much taking his mana and passing him out, or him passing out. The Subaru is kind of pissed off, but more or less, he just goes and pretty much fades out. He wakes up a couple hours later and opens his eyes to the same ceiling. Thinking he died or had a rewind, him getting up, being kind of surprised, or not surprised, but more or less kind of frustrated, thinking he died by Beatrice, by that little petite girl. He walks up and he looks over and he sees, two different colored hair girls, known as Rim and Rom. As he's confused, saying, wait, I guess I didn't die. As he mumbles that under his voice, neither of them realizing what he said. They more or less look at him and say he has a very pervy eyes, as the conversation, let's just say, goes exactly the same like in canon. Then more or less they're pretty much, and also go back on that, it's Rim and Ram. Sorry, Rom is an old man Rom. It's Rim and Ram, okay? R-A-M and I think R-E-M. So Ram and Rom. No, Ram and Rim. Jesus Christ. Okay, Rim, blue-haired girl. Ram, redhead girl. But they start to talk a little bit as they get interrupted through them teasing and kind of joking towards Subaru, as Amelia jumps in and says, oh, stop playing with him, as she kind of, cuts our conversation and asks Subaru if it's okay if we talk for a little bit. As the silence and the motion in the room is actually vastly different than an original canon, simply for the same fact that Subaru is a part of something a lot bigger than an original canon, and something that's been going on for a longer time, more powerful and a lot more complex than anything going on with the Capitol or the Ellis or either the election. We get switched to the courtyard as Subaru is getting ready and is in his jumpsuit doing some calisthenic workouts and doing jogging and pretty much stretching, as he also invites, Amelia to join him. He tells them about radio calisthenics, and they start to pretty much jump up, loosening up their body, as Amelia's kind of confused and kind of, flustered, but she goes along with it as she kind of feels better after the workout, as they yell victory. They start to talk a little bit, as the whole conversation between them gets interrupted when Puck also comes in, joining in with the calisthenics. Puck does ask Subaru and does actually, thank him for saving Amelia's life, and also stepping in to, stop whatever was about to happen to Amelia. They start to talk a little bit, but the main conversation comes in play. They ask him about, you're a ranger. Where'd you come from? What's going on? Who are you? As Subaru says, I'm Super Natsuki. As they say, yeah, you told me that already, but Amelia getting in detail, who are you? I know you saved my life, But when you transform, when you morph, that's what they called it back then. I never seen a ranger in my entire life. They're folklore, they're myths, and only a few of the most highly regarded people in the capital. People like Ian Reinhardt haven't even seen a ranger. And rangers are literally like, I guess you could say, heroes, myths. They're stories told by my parents and told by my family. Not my family, but she goes into detail about how certain people around the world have told stories about rangers. Some people thinking them as cruel but yet judgeful, vengeful spirits of, well, power. Most people thinking them as pretty much magic police, and others looking up to them as heroes in general articles, literally being able to protect the whole world and not being loyal to just one nation or one capital, trying to make all of the world as in peace as itself as possible. Pretty much put simple, world peace is mainly their objective. Now now Subaru's confused, saying, so as they ask a little bit more, but they get interrupted by Rim and Rom. As Rim and Ram tell everybody to get ready, as well the master of the establishment or the, well, manor wants to speak to Subaru and you, Amelia. They all make their way to the dinner table or the dining table or the dinner room, whatever. As they start to talk a little bit, Subaru sees a clown-looking dude and starts to laugh, saying, "You guys hire a clown to entertain you every morning? Dude, I don't understand your rich knowledge." As he bats the man on the back repeatedly, seeming a little bit disrespectful, but the man looks at him with a different level of intent and says, well, as Amelia tries to butt in, saying, well, that's not actually a clown. That's the, as he says, no, I'll handle introductions, Amelia. As he talks to Subaru, telling that he is, well, Roswell, the owner and the head estate of this castle. Subaru instantly apologizes, profusely saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, and all other stuff. Eventually, they get sat down and they eat dinner, or I guess breakfast. Subaru instantly says this is amazing food, as Rem and Ram do tell their whole story about how Rem handles most of the cleaning, chores, and a bunch of other traditional stuff, and Ram is kind of a cooker as well. She helps out, but she's vastly a little bit less, I guess you could say, helpful than Rim is. Like, Rim does most of the heavy lifting. Anything that Ram can't do, she does. So they're just talking as the main story comes in play. And instead of them talking about the election and talking about how Amelia is a princess, they do bring that up. They do talk about that way beforehand, but they do ask him a whole different story and a whole different question entirely, asking him, "You're a ranger." Amelia would have told the group that he was a ranger when he brought him over to the estate, as Reinhardt would have asked in very detailed and in very cryptic language, "Who are you, Subaru?" As he would have gone on about how, well, he's, I guess you could say, a ranger. Now, he doesn't tell them about the whole thing, how he got reincarnated in this new world, where he came here, and about return by death. He doesn't tell them too much, but he does tell them what the old man told them, or told him, the former Red Ranger. He tells them about how he went to a nearby cabin, and more or less or a nearby pretty much workshop, as it disappeared after he went there, but more or less, he tells them that he was chosen to be a Green Ranger, and there's about 4 other Rangers around the world, as long as he was told. They tell him that they did hear stories about other Rangers around the globe and around the world, in different continents and in different countries, but overall, the story still plays the same. They haven't seen a Ranger in Lagunica in over a decade. No Ranger has been sighted, and Rangers are more or less looked at as a problem for some people. They're a wild card. Some of them are vastly powerful and some of them are vastly destructive. Some Rangers in the past going as far as to break against their code and becoming more or less unguided, superficial weirdos, pretty much using their power for whatever pleased them or whatever made their life better. More or less using their power for bad things and in bad ways. Subaru is questioned, and they try to figure out what type of man he is, but they do eventually get a good grasp on who he is, considering that he saved Amelia's life and saved a little girl's life, that being Felt. Now, the whole conversation between Felt would have been taken in by Reinhardt, and the whole election between her and the whole story with her would still play out similar the same. Now, with this being said, we see that Subaru tells them pretty much just like I said earlier, and takes out his morpher as the group is astonished by this and look towards him. Now, Rem does bring up the fact that when he was being treated and they did take his clothes off, get him in better treatment. Because simple, his morpher more or less wasn't, I guess you could say, it wasn't cooperative. None of them could open the morpher, as most of them, when they did touch it, it shocked them, making them drop it. The morpher was more or less locked onto Subaru's biological code or his aura, so it couldn't be opened by anybody else. Now, it would be some sort of undertoning tone in Rem's voice, as Subaru would be kind of catching up on this, but not trying to do anything or jump to conclusions. We see that Subaru gets a tour of the house, but not before being asked, "What do you want from us? You saved Amelia's life, and you're also a ranger, more or less a hero of heroes." As they tell him and ask him, "What do you want to be? And what do you need from us?" As Subaru still picks, "I want to be a worker here, and maybe even a bodyguard." So he does offer to be a bodyguard or a hostess of the house, pretty much being a butler, but also being a guard as well. Same situation and same stuff that Rim and Ram do as well. So Rim and Ram have a different level of respect for him in this continuity, considering that he is a ranger, but they more or less kind of downplay him because he seems like an incompetent fool, not knowing how to clean, do dishes, or even cook that much, as he's horrible at peeling potatoes. They do try to fit him with some clothes, and more or less that whole conversation between them the last couple days would have gone similar the same. The only real difference or changes in Subaru's story is, well, him having a heartfelt talk with Amelia on, well, the fourth day that he's here at the capital, or he's at the estate. He does get offered to get healed by her, as he says no, it's okay, that he wants to learn from his mistakes and his scars on his hands from messing up the potatoes and cutting himself after cleaning and cooking, will help him grow and change and become better. They start to talk a little bit, as she does ask him about where he came from before coming here and becoming a ranger, as he would have told her that, well, he more or less came here from a far world or a far land, not going into the details, but saying that he's from a far land called Japan. And it was very, very beautiful. He also talk a little bit more about Japan, as she says that it sounds like a nearby capital or a nearby place similar around here. Don't you mean that? As they start to talk a little bit more, as Subaru actually does figure out more about this world through the conversation between her, and she learns more about Subaru this way as well. They get a little closer through this conversation, as he does ask her out on a date to, well, the town. Beforehand doing this, he did go to the town with Rem, and that whole divine, or not divine, but demonic inspiration conversation still plays out the same. Subaru still being Subaru, with his personality still being intact, nothing changing besides his status and how people look at him, considering that he is a Power Ranger. Now, with that being said, Rem does tell him before they go to the town not to say that he's a ranger, because it can bring the wrong type of attention. A lot of people in the capital and a lot of people around the world see rangers as a wild card, like an earlier stated. They see them as a problem, and most people that are, trying to do some crazy things and think that a ranger can get in their way or thwart their plans, more or less see rangers as a loaded gun landed right on them. So they see them as a huge threat, and most of them were killed out simply for being rangers and not even doing anything, because they hold untapped potential, and they're tapped into a, I guess you could say in folklore, it's described as a untamed magic. They call it they call it a morphing grid. That's at least what the textbooks say. The Subaru starts to talk a little bit more with Rem, as they start to walk back to the, not capital, but the estate, after talking to the kids, the town folk, and also petting the dog, which I will come and play later. Now, with Subaru being kind of confused by this, He just goes with the flow, and the days pass by. He does ask, Amelia out on a date and does explain what a date is, but they talk a little bit more. That night, he's super excited for this, and he's really pumped to go to the town tomorrow with Amelia. He goes to sleep that night, and he wakes up in the building, well, not the building, but the same bed he was, well, the first day, as Subaru returns by death. Subaru wakes up being in a panic and dazed, saying and actually asking Rim and Ram why they're talking to him like they just met him. He looks at his hands, figuring out that he's restarted. Subaru tries to go in the same paths he did originally, having the same conversation with Amelia and making some of the changes, but mainly keeping the same plot points happening. Here's a little bit more about the backstory of Lagunica, the capital, the election, and how Amelia is soon to be, or is a runner-upper to being a king/queen. So more or less, Subaru gets the rundown a little bit more, does ask a little bit more questions in this roundabout, considering that he is still Subaru, but he is a little bit more motivated, considering that he got a lot more information first time around, considering that people see him as a lot more powerful, because he's a freaking Power Ranger, and Power Rangers are seen as noble, legendary knights in this world, because they've been around and the mantle's been passed down to team to team to team for decades, as most of the Rangers were able to take on the Witches of Calamity by themselves and win. So yeah, so Subaru does ask a little bit more questions, but the same conversations happen the same, and he does still pick to be a worker here and a bodyguard. He goes on the same task. He does offer to, stitch his own clothes, as he does eventually gets offered to be taught how to read and write by Amelia and, well, Ram. So Ram teaches him how to read and write, saying that he doesn't want, Ryan, pretty much Roswell shouldn't have a illiterate, idiot be his butler on top of a illiterate ranger. That would just look stupid and also look bad at the Amelia camp. Just to talk a little bit, as they kind of have a similar conversation, and he does tell her about a lot more earlier in canon about the story of the red ogre and the blue ogre. He tells him about a story about how the two were best friends and the other wanted the humans to like him, but the humans were scared of the ogre. But the other ogre wanted to make sure his friend had what he wanted, so he made himself look like the villain to the other ogres and had his other friends stop him, making the ogres, well, not so much friends anymore, but still the humans would have embraced the other ogre, despising the ogre's friend. The ogre going into the forest and living alone, the other ogre never seeing his friend again, but gaining the trust of the humans. Ram says it's a stupid story and that they're both dumb, but Super says it's charming and it's emotional. It shows that you can give up anything, but at the end of the day, friends will be there for you. They'll sacrifice their own well-being to make sure you're happy. That's what true friendship is, and true commemoration is. She says it's stupid and that you shouldn't tell Ram that conversation or that story because it might, rub her the wrong way considering their past. But she doesn't tell him about her past just yet. We get switched a couple more days, as nothing really changes too much besides this roundabout. Rim actually does ask Puck about magic, about a magic gate, and all this other stuff. Now, this being said, Subaru's magic gate and his magic infinity is vastly changed. He still has returned by death, and the whole plot point and story between the witches that he has and the relationship he has between them is going to be a little bit more different, but it's somewhat still the same. We'll learn a little bit more about the lore of the Witch of Destruction, or the witch that, is pretty much giving Subaru that power of return by death and the ability to change his fate, as we'll see more about how her past was affected by the Rangers and why she takes such a liking to Subaru. Now, with Subaru being this ranger, his energy or his magic would be vastly different, having the same magical ability and powers as the Green Ranger and the Mystic Force lineup, being able to control, well, grass and earth. Him being able to control wildlife, not wildlife, but pretty much, trees, vines, and also other things like that. Being able to also control earth, basically being able to be an earthbender. As well, Subaru would try this out, having the ability to control grass, as he would have pretty much started to use his magic, conjuring up grass from the field and sharpening it into pillars of very condensed, sharp grass, kind of simulating a blade, more or less, kind of like how Power Rangers do when they're, grass type. So he would start to chug these around, some of them even cutting, some trees and also sticking into some pillars. As Amelia would be kind of impressed by this show of strength and saying that he is pretty powerful for a beginner ranger, considering that he just became a ranger like 2 days ago. As Subaru chuckles, saying, "Yeah, I guess I'm a fast learner." As he learns a little bit more, as he tries to build up his, pretty much abilities, but so far, besides him morphing, the only other power he has is the green energy blast he used in part 1, and the ability to control grass and move it around like blades of steel. He will soon be able to straight up earthbend like Korra or characters like Toph, but that's for later parts and later episodes. So we see that Subaru starts to talk and conversations play out the same. He eventually does ask Beatrice the same conversation, asking her about, curses and about how someone could die through magic. He asked her a little bit more, but he also asked her about the Rangers. And Beatrice drops a bombshell on Subaru's head, saying that she knew a Ranger a little bit before she, pretty much met the current ruler or the current head of the estate. This Ranger was a little different, and he went by the name of Ken Takashiro, as he was, well, a Yellow Ranger. He was brass and cocky, but more or less, he was a good person at heart, as you seem to be, but I don't trust you just yet. They talk a little bit, but she says, "I suppose I can give you some bit of information." She goes on about how the Rangers have a code, and each of them are shown or figure out who they are and what they're meant to do later in life. It takes some years, maybe even some decades, before a Ranger finds out what their purpose is, but they eventually find out before they die. Most of the time. Now, Subaru's kind of confused, but saying, "So, what's my purpose?" Beatrice saying, "I suppose I can't tell you that." As the conversation gets a little dull, but him saying okay and just walking out of the library, being confused on what cryptic bull Beatrice told him. Subaru continues with his plot point and his story, his fate, as later that night he tries to go to sleep, but feeling sick and woozy as he gets up from his bed, pretty much dragging himself out of his room and trying to ask for help. Now, last time he died, he thought it was from a curse, so now he thinks it's an intruder in the house. As he goes for his morpher, trying to conjure up something to help him out in the situation. He tries to go into his pocket, finding his morpher, but he gets side-blitzed by some sort of chain-type weapon, getting sent flying into a nearby pillar, or a nearby not mace, but pretty much vase in the hallway, making the glass shatter. Subaru gets up and seeing another chain wrap around or trying to pretty much bash his head in, as Subaru dodges out of the way, shooting a blast of green energy towards the way of the shadowed assailant. The assailant dodges out of the way, chucking its blade or its chain weapon right back as Subaru tries to blast a huge blast of energy yet again, but being stopped because the mana in his body is starting to shatter a little bit. As Subaru gets hit with a mean headmaker as his head splats and he reboots, or he returns by death. He opens his eyes, jolting up from his sleep, screaming, as Rim and Ram are confused and also terrified by this, hugging each other, looking at Subaru, seeing the terrified look on his face. Subaru gets up, pretty much saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you guys, as Amelia also runs in, asking what's wrong. Subaru being confused and kind of peed off on what's going on. Now, Subaru wanted to change his fate and trying to make the story different. He goes in the same path as, I think, the third time around. He goes and tries to make the same situations he did before, as he actually picks a different way to go, or a different roundabout. As he asks Roswell, he's a slimy mug though. If you watch the series, you know he's slimy as hell, bro. He a slimy dude. But besides that, we see that Subaru, more or less, picks being a visitor or more or less a attendant here than a worker. The conversations do change a little bit between him, Ram, and Ram to make things different. So he goes around and tries to build up information. Asking Beatrice the same conversation he did earlier, Beatrice telling him the same thing, how she knew a ranger, a yellow ranger, called Ken. He does ask her a little bit more about the morphing grid, as she says she doesn't know much about it, and that it's just an untapped version or untapped mode of magic, and said to be incredibly powerful and unstoppable. But only the most powerful Rangers are able to tap into its full potential. And I highly doubt you're any one of those, I suppose. A Subaru kind of gets flustered, not flustered, but kind of pissed off, but just puts it in the back of his head, just assuming that Beatrice is just an asshole. So he just walks off, as he also does ask Beatrice a favor to keep him safe on the 4th day here, as he doesn't know what's going to go down or what's going to happen. Beatrice looking at him, and for some reason, some motive, she would agree to this. As Subaru goes on through the day, as he tries to figure out how to, pretty much stop what was happening or what's going on. So through that whole conversation he had with Beatrice just lets him go, as Subaru kind of goes behind and asks her not to do it because he actually goes back on his plan and thinks about actually leaving and camping out in front of the estate or on a nearby mountainside to make sure the intruder doesn't come in and he can stop them. Him trying to get a grip on morphine, as he would go into the forest saying his goodbyes to everybody, Amelia, Ram, Roswell, and everybody else, including Puck and Beatrice. He goes on his merry way as he camps out in a nearby mountainside near the estate, trying to watch from afar to see what happens later that night. He sees and hears chains rattling behind him, as he instantly recognizes it as maybe the same assailant that killed him last time. He gets up, taking his morpher, and saying, I don't want to hurt you, as, well, they would have said, you're not going to hurt me. He looks closer and closer, seeing Rim. Him being shocked and frightened, yelling out, what the hell are you doing? I thought we were friends, as his heart sank in the middle of his chest. Rim going on about how we're not friends and that you're soaked in the stench of the witch. The conversation plays out similarly the same, but Rim tells her that he's not a witch cultist.
Subaru says that.
You came in here being a ranger that the capital hasn't seen for decades, as she would have gone on about how the Green Ranger should not be trusted, and said something cryptic about the last Green Ranger. Subaru's confused, saying, what are you talking about? For her saying she's done talking to him, and she isn't going to let him destroy her new family. She lunges straight towards Subaru as a fight ensues, and conjuring up some greenery around him, shooting him towards Rim. Rim dodging and weaving all of the attacks, but getting slightly grazed along the arm, as she pretty much squints and says, that's all you have? She rushes straight towards the Subaru yet again, but Subaru in a split second morphs. He morphs, being shielded by the morphing grid, as it tanks the attack from the maze, sending the Subaru flying into a nearby tree, but minimal damage being caused on his body. Subaru gets up, looking at his gloves, saying this is the second time he morphed, and that he's kind of, surprised how different it feels. Last time it was adrenaline, now it's instinct. As Subaru smirks under the mask, saying that's all you have, as he gets to a fighting stance, as somehow the knowledge of the morphing grid is giving him kind of a basis of fighting. The Subaru doesn't know how to little bit of fighting. He doesn't know how to do wrestling skills and to disarm people, but more or less he ain't like a top tier fighter. Now, I would say I think I know the morphing grid does give you a little bit of a basis of how to fight, but only certain Rangers are able to just fight off rip after getting a morpher. So I don't know for sure what the whole thing with the Mystic Force Rangers are, but I'm pretty sure they get a pretty good grasp on how to fight once they morph. Now we see that Subaru is kind of getting used to this being his second ever time morphing, as this would be like a huge buff because I don't want him to be super OP off rip. We see Subaru starts to hold his own, starts to hold his own against Rim, actually overpowering her in some cases. Rim kind of getting an over blasting speed on Rim, or not Rim, but Subaru, as Subaru starts to dodge and weave out of the way, grabbing his chain or grabbing Rim's chain, yanking her towards him as she gets headbutted by Subaru. Subaru gets sent flying and the recoil behind both of their attacks as she does try to hit him with another headbutt as well at the same time. Subaru gets sent flying as the morphing grid would have taken most of the attack, as Rim would have also been sent flying in the opposite direction. Subaru flying down on the ground, as we see that Rim would have started to fall off a cliffside, getting sent flying a lot farther than Subaru. Subaru running over there trying to not have her die, as he still found her as a friend. He runs over there, jumping down, trying to grab her, but in a second she says checkmate and wraps her chain around Subaru's neck, cracking, as we get switched to another time loop, or another go. Subaru opening his eyes to the same goddamn ceiling. Subaru yells out as he stops himself before he looks over to the other two, him seeing Rim and Ram. Him looking at Rim with stain in his eyes, but him trying to mask it by a nightmare. He thinks to himself how he can make things different and what he can do to make changes happen. Subaru goes and talks to Beatrice the same way and asks her a favor on the third day. His days go similar to the same, him trying not to change anything, but trying to have his conversation with Rim happen the same. He takes Rim to the town yet again, and their conversation ensues the same. Him trying to build up a more meaningful relationship with her and be a lot more nice towards her, trying to win her over. But the days ensue the same, and the week passes, as Subaru on the fourth day asks Beatrice to keep him safe. Subaru goes to sleep that night, and luckily, he actually wakes up alive, not dying in his sleep and not being attacked. Subaru is walking around the building as he feels an eerie sense of silence. Subaru walks over and opens the door, seeing Rim dead. The whole room goes silent as Subaru asks what happened, and Ram looking at Subaru as Subaru tries to go towards Rim's body, but Ram slapping his hand away, saying, "Don't you touch her," as she's crying. Subaru's confused and distraught as she starts to pretty much assume and point fingers towards him as he's not saying anything about her death, and more or less he's keeping secrets. As Reinhardt, or not Reinhardt, but Roswell will be kind of confused and asking questions about, do you know anything about this? As Subaru would have been in shock, not saying anything. As Ram would be off rip, or Ram would be off rip, pissed off, blaming any type of fingers because she lost her sister. So she tries to attack Subaru, but Beatrice jumps in. Subaru makes his way down to the cliffside, same and usual, as he doesn't have his morpher on him because he's still in his, clothes. And somehow he freaking left his morpher back at the castle, so like, Brody's cooked. Unless he somehow finds out how to tap into his magic better right now, he's cooked right now. So he runs off, but we see that Beatrice shows up as he, gets saved last minute by Beatrice. As Ram would be confused, saying, "Why are you helping him? What are you doing?" As she gets super pissed off. Beatrice saying that he asked her a favor and she can't break promises. As she starts to get a little bit more grounded as they're about to ensue in a fight. Subaru being handed his morpher says Beatrice grabbed it before he went and gave it to him, saying that you can protect yourself with my help. Subaru looking behind him, looking at the cliffside and looking back at Ram and Beatrice. As a moment would happen where Subaru will be confused on what path he should take. Should he fight back and win against Rom and stop what's going on? Or should he take the plunge, start over, and try to save everybody? Subaru looking at his morpher, saying, is this the right way? Is this the path I should take? Him going back into a conversation that wasn't shown in part 1, but a conversation he had with the original Red Ranger that gave him the morpher when he got here. He would have gone on about how Subaru is destined for greatness, as he's supposed to be the best of us all, and supposed to reach a state of untapped power one day. Saying that Subaru has so much potential that he doesn't even know it. There's so much more to his story that he doesn't even know how far he can go. He tells Subaru that he needs to be able to make tough decisions when the time comes, and how he can change his fate more times than any ranger could ever. As Subaru looks at the morpher, throwing it on the ground and saying, I want to save you guys all. This is the only thing I can do, that I can really do, to make everything right. Then I'm going to do it. Beatrice being confused, saying, what are you talking about? As he rushes and jumps off the cliff. As I'm going to leave out here, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And as always, guys, have a blessed day. And before I go, yeah, Subaru will be going through a lot of, mental problems. Not mental problems, but a lot of situations where, you should say, his conflict of what he wants or what he has to do will come and bite him back and forth a lot more than original canon. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and as always, guys, have a blessed day. Deuces.